Hey, everyone. Welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. I'd been in Hawaii for a few months, waiting for my sister to come. I was sleeping on the beaches. I was sleeping in my pup tent, a little single-person tent. I heard footsteps in the sand outside my tent one night. The movement came to a halt, and I realized someone was standing there. I strained to get out of my deep sleep and become conscious as soon as possible. "Hey man, what time is it?" a man's voice inquired after a long silence. Something wasn't right, so I replied in the loudest voice I could muster in order to sound like a man. "I don't know, dude," I replied. I was expecting to hear the man's footsteps as he walked away, but I didn't. It was incredibly quiet for what felt like an eternity, and while I lay there in solitude, I tried to become fully awake and conscious. The man broke into my tent through the little hole of my feet. I thrashed, struck, and kicked with all my might. He yelled at me, "Cut it out!" and "What are you doing?" as he walked out of the tent. I walked out of the tent directly behind him. I was relieved to be out of the tent that had fallen around us and out in the open. But I was afraid of who this man was and what he wanted. My thoughts and heart were racing. "What are you doing?" I asked in response to his question. "I simply want to talk," he said. We were both sitting in the sand, and he was just a few feet away. I threw my arms around my legs and brought my knees up to my chest. I raised my eyes to the beach to my left where he was seated. I turned to look down the beach to my right. The nearest campers were too far away for me to flee without getting apprehended if he pursued me. I was about to cry for aid when I realized I was sliding backwards and everything went white, then dark. When I awoke, the man was on top of me, his hand covering my lips. "Shut up. I have a knife," he said. I felt him prick my cheek with the knife, and I thought he was going to kill me at that moment. The notion of him slicing my face was terrifying, and the horror of experiencing it drove me to embrace death before it happened. I was in the skies, maybe 20 or 30 feet up, moments after these ideas. I was looking down at the man on top of my body. I was conscious that I didn't have a body, but I could see as if I did. I'd be floating flat on my stomach, looking straight down if I had a body. I looked to my right, as if I had rotated my head, and realized that I was in some kind of plane. There was a layer of blackness above me, an invisible layer between myself and the earth, and an open space of light out to the right side. I wasn't sure if I should go there or not. I looked down, where the man was on top of my body, and felt an overwhelming sense of injustice and wrongdoing. I was enraged by what he was doing. I was back in my body, beneath this man, before I realized it. I tried to speak, but his hand was on my mouth, telling me to stop. What happened next took me by surprise, because I'd always been quiet and insecure. I started mumbling beneath his hand, letting him know I wasn't going to yell or scream, and he took his hand away. I kept whispering, and words flowed out of my mouth. I talked to him about unfairness, cruelty, and how wrong it was for him to do what he did, as well as why and how he should be loving instead. I wish I had written down all I told him that night, because I feel it was God's words, not mine. The man sat up, drew me close, and hugged me. He apologized to me. "You need help," he remarked. I hadn't known he'd hit me on the back of my head with a heavy rock and that I was bleeding profusely from the cut. He rose up, scooped me up, and carried me down to the ocean's edge, where he told me to wash my hair. I did this while wondering what he was going to do next. He scooped me up and carried me over the beach and up a hill to a parking area where Hawaiians and visitors would camp. The man approached a Hawaiian man and his family who were camping. "My girlfriend is hurt. She needs aid," he told the Hawaiian. The Hawaiian let us ride in the back of his pickup truck as he drove us 14 miles to the next town, Lahaina. On the long trip down, I leaned on my attacker, hoping he would continue to feel compelled to assist me, rather than fearing repercussions for what he had done. I was worried he'd alter his mind and hurl me out of the truck. We got a Lahaina hospital, but it was closed because it was around 2 or 3 a.m. I had no idea hospitals closed. We stepped out of the truck and approached the front doors. I sat down on the cement and leaned against the glass door. I was terrified of being alone with this man again, so as the Hawaiian drove away, he looked across at me. When I caught his gaze, I stared at him as intently and wistfully as I could, hoping he would see my dread. He apparently did, since a little while later, the cops arrived and began questioning my attacker. A doctor arrived and opened the hospital door while they were talking. I told her everything that had transpired as soon as the door closed behind us. I stated, unequivocally, that I was not this man's girlfriend. She rushed outside and informed the police, who brought the man into custody for interrogation. To protect the wound, the doctor sewed up my skull and sprayed it with something that resembled a plastic band-aid. When the doctor was done, a police officer drove me to the police station and interrogated me. He told me that the man who had attacked me had been with a friend earlier that evening, and that his friend had raped a girl on another beach. He inquired if I intended to file charges. When I asked what that included, he replied that it may take many months. I knew I didn't want to stay in Hawaii for that long, and most significantly, I felt like my assailant had actually heard God's word through me that night. I thought he'd got it because he helped me and didn't rape me. I hoped he had been eternally transformed, so I refrained to press charges. When the cops were finished, they released me. They didn't offer to take me back to my campsite. My hair was knotted with dried salt water. I had a cut on my head that was exposed behind a clear, sprayed-on plastic band-aid, and my shirt was stained with dried blood and salt water. After a rape attempt a few hours earlier, I had to go down the highway and hitchhike back to my campsite alone as the sun rose. But as I walked along the highway, I reflected on the miracle that had occurred when I left my body. I looked up and couldn't believe I'd only been floating above the planet for a few hours. That night, I understood I'd been granted a wonderful gift. I felt like I was the only person on the planet who was certain there was life after death.